Jujutsu Kaisen is the most talked about manga in recent history, with Season 3 just having concluded. Its popularity is at a rise yet again with new memes, new debates, new fans, and most importantly, new critiques. Today, I want to address a critical issue of the Jujutsu Kaisen power system that gets brought up by fans a lot, and it's usually talked about in a negative way. That aspect being binding vows. A binding vow is a pact made between two or more sorcerers which benefits them both mutually. It can also be an equivalent exchange made by a single sorcerer where they lose something in order to gain something. A fairly complex concept integrated into an already confusing power system. Like most JK fans, I myself am not exactly the biggest fan of binding vows. While they are very unique and cool concept, I believe Gege fundamentally failed to implement these pacts in the story while giving proper explanations. Let me explain. A binding vow normally benefits the sorcerers involved. However, throughout all 271 chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen, not once has it ever been even implied, let alone explained what exactly is the punishment on breaking these binding vows. The closest we've got to an answer is an unknown consequence. Even the most experienced and knowledgeable sorcerers like Kenjaku or Sukuna are unaware of what curse can befall on a sorcerer if they may break a binding vow. For an aspect of the power system that gets exploited so often, you would think that we would at least once see the curse of breaking the pact. Let me talk about a binding vow in specific that I think is just pure bullshit. Bird strike. By forcing a crow to commit suicide, the trade-off is to erase the cursed energy limit of a bird. This is a suicide-based vow utilized by Mei, and I just want you to realize that this simple trade-off is enough to give a random bird enough power to one-shot a special grade curse. It is explicitly stated that no one has been able to survive bird strike. Gojo Sukuna and Kenjaku opted to dodge instead of tanking it head-on. I find this exploit ridiculous because if you think about it, the implication is that a random bird sacrificing its life is enough to generate power that can not only one-shot special grade cursed spirits, but the strongest characters of the verse aren't willing to take the attack head-on. Just hearing this makes the executioner's sword look weak. Let's take it a step further and talk about Sukuna's ridiculous but genius exploitation of binding vows. The fans love to hate on Sukuna by calling him a binding vow merchant. I personally think he's just profiting off of the power system, and that's fair, as he's putting his intellect to use. After being hit by 7 black flashes by Yuji, eliminating any chances of Sukuna recovering his RCT, he manages to pop a domain, an incomplete domain by altering hand signs, and he gets to expand the domain with no reduced output or decrease in its effective area. And the narrator quite literally says, impromptu binding vows. Sukuna could only maintain this domain for 99 seconds in this state. The explanation on how this binding vow even is an equivalent exchange just feels too vague and rushed, especially considering the state Sukuna was in. And that's what led to so many JJK fans hating this sequence of Shinjuku Showdown. And honestly, I don't blame them. Sometimes it doesn't matter if the explanation makes sense, the writing decision can feel wrong. Another heavily criticized vow is between Sukuna and Yuji, where in exchange for healing Yuji, Sukuna can get 1 full minute of control over his body when he says enchain. The condition is that Yuji forgets about this vow, and Sukuna cannot harm anyone during this 1 minute. However, when this vow does take effect later on in the story, Sukuna not only technically harms Hana, he also cuts off Yuji's finger and shoves them down Megumi's throat. Sukuna himself says that this is a gamble as he could break the vow here, but the part that's really vaguely explained is how forcefully making Megumi eat a poisonous finger not considered harming him. This is ignoring what he did to Hana. Could this make sense? Sure. Under very vague explanations, this works fine, but for Jujutsu Kaisen fans, vague statements don't really work. Binding vows aren't all bad though. A lot of the times binding vows just make perfect sense. For example, revealing one's hand, where a sorcerer reveals his technique to his opponent, and in exchange for that, his technique becomes more effective. By exposing your technique, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. But because of this, you also gain more power to your CT. It just makes perfect sense, and is one of the best parts of the JK power system. But then again, There's moments like these where Hikari can sacrifice his arm to quite literally escape certain death, and at that point, how exactly is that even a fair exchange? Maybe I'm missing something essential. What do you guys think?